Let's go! Oh yeah, there's a football game. Yes, LSU versus Florida. All the competitive games we've played over the years versus those wretched Gators. Could get a little ugly. As always, I want your score predictions down below. This 6 p.m. Central kickoff time, prime time. The whole world gets to see us get whipped, or will we actually put up a fight? And there is one reason why LSU, or should I say why you should hope LSU plays really well in this game. Now, in our recruiting video yesterday, really generated some discussion. So I'm going to reply to some of the comments from that on this video later. So let's go. One of the big myths, I can't ever say the word myth. One of the biggest one of the biggest falsehoods, how about that, from last year's season was that the Alabama game was close and the Florida game was a blowout. And when you actually look at the scores, it looks like that. LSU beat Alabama by 5, and LSU beat Florida by 14. But in actuality, the Alabama game wasn't ever really close because LSU led by 2 possessions most of the game. The Florida game is the exact opposite, where Florida led in the third quarter, 28-21. Now, LSU, of course, ended up coming back and winning 42-28. It was a packed night in Tiger Stadium. Herbie was in the building, and something happened. What was it? LSU had one of these guys. Come on. Oh, yeah, a defensive coordinator who figured out the Florida offense. And you know Kyle Trask, who is gunning for this Heisman Trophy, is going to want to show up and show out. But before we get to that, it's kind of weird. LSU, for the first time since 2008, the great LSU statistician, Todd Politz, points this out. LSU is starting their 3rd separate quarterback come this Saturday in Gainesville, the first time since 2008. So obviously, if you're starting Max Johnson, who I don't think is as good as TJ Finley, you got your fingers crossed to see if LSU can actually move the football. But this is actually a good thing they're starting Max Johnson, because we don't know who Max Johnson really is as a quarterback. Now, we have some film, but most of it is in garbage time. And you don't really know who a starter is until they are actually named the starter. But really, the story here in this one is that Florida offense. Just last week, you played Alabama, which is the #1 scoring offense in the SEC. Just for this week, to play the 2nd highest scoring offense in the SEC, with multiple players gunning for NFL draft status, All-American status, and Heisman trophies. So what's interesting is Florida's offensive line is good. They're not as good as Alabama's offensive line, and Kyle Trask isn't a runner, a lot like Mac Jones. So if LSU can stop the run some, once again, Florida's running game isn't as good as Alabama's. If they could stop the run some, that should help out their pass rush. And especially in a 4-man rush, you got to get home. This LSU pass rush is not as good as it was at the start of the year. The only problem is, even when you factor in Derek Stingley, LSU has not been able to cover anyone. There's been all kinds of coverage busts, the lack of adjustments on the back end. You got to point at Bo Pelini, Corey Raymond, and pretty much anyone that coaches that defense. Kyle Pitts is a junior. Their most dynamic offensive weapon is a senior in Kadarius Toney, who legit has some of the most serious wiggle you'll ever see. And then on special teams, I'll keep this one brief. Zach Van Rosenberg, who will be used a lot on Saturday, he wasn't as good versus Alabama as he's been throughout the year, and it's a pretty simple explanation. I think he's playing through injury. For those that remember, against Texas A&M, we pointed this out in our film study. He dove on the yard marker, wildly making a tackle out of bounds. And I do think he is playing through injury. I give him a lot of credit for that. Hopefully he is punting the football better on Saturday, because there will be a few 3-and-outs. Even though Florida's defense is not all that good. Cole Taylor's going to have to play a lot. along with the baseball holdover, Nick Stortz. So we'll see how LSU handles that in the absence of Arik Gilbert and Chasen Hines, who I have pointed out in film studies at right guard. It's been a rough go at it lately. Let's see if Chasen Hines can play better. If not, and this goes for all the offensive linemen, I would like to see some of the younger guys get reps. Key player for Florida, we've talked about their skilled guys, but Ventrell Miller is a really solid linebacker. He actually wears a traditional linebacker number at 51, which is kind of cool to me. I know I'm weird. And then the key player, we always point out coaches, it's Dan Mullen. If you were to pick a coach who has coached better versus LSU more than anyone, I would argue Dan Mullen over Nick Saban. Now, of course, Nick Saban has dominated LSU over the years, but Dan Mullen, multiple times as an underdog, has really outcoached the other sideline. And now that we know what we know about last year's LSU team, the fact that that Florida squad, which isn't nearly as experienced as they are now, was leading LSU in a night game in Tiger Stadium, lets you know how good this guy is. And he's not going to be going up against Dave Aranda. I would be very shocked if Florida's Dan Mullen, who has been a pretty eccentric personality this year, especially with that weird Thanksgiving mush take, I think Dan Mullen, whether it be Dak Prescott at Mississippi State or now with Florida, is going to be giving LSU a lot of issues. So now for prediction. As you can see, this line is gigantic. Florida, a 23.5 point favorite. 68 is the point spread. And I'm dead serious. I've never been more confident in a team covering the spread than Florida. Look, everything that points to LSU points to this game getting disastrous very quickly. First thing you have to keep in mind is the weather is going to be spectacular. It looks like it's going to be in the 70s, 60s range, light chance of precipitation, light wind. So this high-speed Florida offense is, going to have great conditions to do what they do. And remember this, Florida's coaches are just better than LSU's coaches as far as figuring out a game. And they've not proven to be able to make in-game adjustments to even make any road game close. And I know Texas A&M, you only lost by 13 when your defense actually played good for once. Well, that was because of a Max Johnson garbage time touchdown to a guy that's not even on your team anymore. So this is going to be your first week without your top two pass catchers, an inconsistent offensive line, a raucous Florida team who, by the way, is gunning for their first college football playoff berth. There is no way LSU covers the spread. 23.5. I believe my boy Mincy has Florida as one of his locks of the week, and Mincy sharper than I am. Well, it's simple. I am shocked this number is not closer to the Bama number, considering everything that LSU's lost, everything that's been going on. It's just the simple reality of the situation. Now, the over-under is a little bit more interesting, 68 points. We have seen Max Johnson move the football in garbage time, so you might be able to get a few points there at the end. But this is why I think the LSU defense should play more inspired, because against Mac Jones, who has been so spectacular this year, we can't have any SEC quarterback gun for the GOAT, Joe Burrow. Now, I am comfortable in saying Joe Burrow's spectacular season last year will never be touched. But Mac Jones and Kyle Trask are well on their way. They've both been spectacular when you factor in completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, the fact that they've had to play an SEC game each and every week. So, yeah, I still think Joe Burrow's better, especially what we know now about Clemson and Oklahoma and Georgia. But LSU defense, if you're going to be inspired, play for the guy that gave us everything last year, okay? Tell Florida you're not going to score 60 on us. Well, they probably will. I'm going to go this game final score 49-17. How about that? My recruiting piece yesterday was something I've worked quite some time on. I really wanted... Did I just step on a bug? I just wanted to take a deep look to see what it's like with LSU and five-star recruits. And there's a pretty interesting trend, so I highly recommend you watch the video. I shared with you how in recent history, a lot of five-stars have chosen to move closer to home. Now, that's just a little piece, but, the Arik Gilbert story is just so fascinating because this is a true freshman who played right away, and, there's all different things that you have to factor into a situation. So let's get to some of your comments. I like this name, JT Thigh. Good insight on the five-star recruit. Arik and his family has to do whatever is right and best for them, but this year the program has bigger issues to worry about with the horrible defensive coordinator and the messy allegations off the field. So that's what's crazy. LSU's about to lose a generational five-star tight end. I hope he changes his mind, but, that's the least of Ed Orgeron's worries with all the off-the-field stuff that he has to worry about and coaching changes that are going to require millions upon millions of dollars of buyout. And on top of that, Ed Orgeron has to even worry if he's going to have a job. Now, I got to show some love for Carvis because every single time he comments, it's something that makes me think. And that's what the point is of this channel. It's LSU deep thinking. Now, some of our videos are just fun, but for the most part, every time I turn on a camera, I want to give you an interesting perspective. And Carvis is very much one of those guys. Marcel Brooks would have been the middle linebacker. I'm glad you touch on recruiting players who actually want to be here. So he continues about some Louisiana guys that decided to go outside of the state. And I mentioned Kenny Young, who, by the way, had a pick six versus the New England Patriots. So I highly recommend, I cannot say no, I highly recommend you actually watch the video because for those of you that say the best thing to do is just recruit the state of Louisiana and get 3 stars from the state and they really want to be here, so let's get them here. Yesterday's video heavily, and I mean heavily, pushes your narrative because LSU does go after the 5 stars. And look, if you're Ed Orgeron, your job is to recruit the best players. But with everything that I showed yesterday, sometimes when you recruit the best players, guess what? Everybody wants the best players. And it really hamstrings you because those players know, especially as the transfer portal begins to lax, those players know that they could leave at the drop of the dime and every school would want them, especially considering we've had more transfers win the Heisman Trophy than non-transfers in recent years. Transfers can transform your program. They're more experienced. They're more seasoned. Going from one school to another humbles them. There's a lot of good reason to want transfers in your program. And when you have a 5-star, like, for instance, Arik Gilbert, he knows once he steps on that campus that Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and all those guys are going to want them. That is the exact opposite in the case of a 3-star Louisiana kid because that kid may not have as high of a ceiling per se. That kid absolutely wants to be there. Now, obviously, some Louisiana guys want to just go elsewhere and all the power to them, but the point remains the same. They grew up in Louisiana. They grew up with family members from Louisiana. They grew up cheering for LSU. It's their dream. So they're going to work as hard as they can to make it work at that Division I program. And for those that don't know, you look at the 3 stars and lower level 4 stars that really pushed LSU to the national championship last year. one thing they all had in common was their extremely ridiculously difficult, hard-nosed work ethic. And that's not to say that 4 and 5 stars don't work hard. It's just those guys are going to work as hard as they possibly can to make it work for LSU. And that in and of itself is something to keep in mind, because a good example of this, and so many of you sent me a clip from Jacob Hester talking about Arik Gilbert. I don't think the video is posted anymore on YouTube, but Jacob Hester made good points in that video, and Jacob Hester's a good example of this. He was a 2-star guy from Evangel, a pretty, as you know, prestigious program, who was going to do whatever it took to become one of the best running backs to play at LSU in modern history. So, when you have that desire, that want to make the home state school work, it does wonders for your team. It's power. Our LSU. Bah! Bum, bum, bum. Am I getting a DiGiorno tonight? DiGiorno. Is that even the best frozen pizza? I mean, they're good.